Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. This is the first event of 2022 for the Smart Manufacturing Alliance. This is our manufacturing outlook. And this is the first of these. We've been really looking forward to this session since we kind of came into concept back in the autumn of last year. So this morning, we're delighted to be joined by Professor Tim Minshall from the Institute of Manufacturing. So just a little bit from Tim's bio, so you've got a bit of background. So Tim is a Dr. John C. Taylor Professor of Innovation at the University of Cambridge and the head of the Institute of Manufacturing and the head of the IFM's Centre of Technology and Management. He's also a fellow of the Churchill College. So I don't know how he gets time to do anything else, but he's also on several other boards and organisations. And he's a recipient of the University of Cambridge Pilkington Prize for Teaching Excellence. So we're delighted to have Tim on board with us today as part of the session. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
No, thank you for being here. And we're going to kick off with Guy Hodgkinson. So Guy's a partner at MacIntyre Hudson, MHA. He's an audit and assurance specialist working in the manufacturing sector and heavily involved in both manufacturing engineering and the renewable energy sector. And he's also a member of the CBI Council for the East of England. And that's where we're going to kick off today in terms of the CBI, isn't it, Guy? I think you've got some scene setting for us around the CBI's economic outlook figures that he's going to talk us through. So I'll hand over to you now, Guy.
Yeah, being an accountant, obviously I love data. And I think, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So I'll take you through some of the key things that I think that the CBI presented, and obviously being part of that, I was able to get my hands on. So we'll kick it off in terms of looking at the growth forecast for the UK. If it works. There we go. So as you can see, this is the CBI's forecasted growth. So they have revised their forecasts, as you can see. So going into 2022, originally they had it at 6.1. They've actually revised that down to 5.1% growth. Now, what we have seen, I mean, we're largely through January now, is that the manufacturing PMI has also dropped. So the anticipated level was 57.9. So forecasting coming into the month, a lot of confidence, everybody thinking that we're going to have exceptional growth. It actually came out at 56.9. So we're starting to see a slight wane on that already. And I think a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, we all know about the energy costs going through the roof at the minute, freight costs as well, wage inflation, and we'll touch on these things more as we go through the presentation. But I think consequently, a lot of businesses have had to increase their prices. So there was a lot of forward buying in December, which has impacted on the January purchasing index because the price rise is coming, everyone just front loading really. There was that. And I think also Omicron has had a big impact. So I was talking to a client of mine earlier this week, actually, and he was saying that a third of his workforce are currently off with COVID. So it's having, a really big impact out there in the real world. And hopefully those of you on the call haven't had such a severe impact yet, but, it's certainly something to be aware of. So I think still, this growth is good and it does show confidence in the market. But perhaps not as much as what we thought. I've also got a slide here just talking about the actual impact of COVID. So as you can see, once it hit, it was a really big hit to the economy. Now we're coming back strong, but that said, we have this scarring effect, as it's being coined by the economists, of going, this is the trend line, the grey line, and we're 3% off that still. And the forecasted position is that we'll continue to be 3% off that. So it has had a huge impact on the economy, and we are now below that trend line for growth. So what does this all mean? So with growth also comes inflation. So as you can see, we're spiking quite heavily here on the inflation. So at the minute, it's about 5.4% is being reported by, and that's against a Bank of England target of 2%, so almost triple what their target is. And I think we're all feeling it as well in the marketplace. Certainly all my clients that I'm talking to, we all feel that inflation's a lot higher than 5.4%. The cost of materials, cost of labour, energy, freight, as I mentioned, it does feel significant. So the Bank of England have actually said that in April 2022, that they feel it'll reach its highest point, and that they believe that'll be 6%, and then it will start to come down. So I guess it's all about how they envisage that inflation coming down. The stats at the minute show that we're going to continue to have this high level of inflation because of the job vacancies in the market. So this is from the Office of National Statistics as at December 2021, so at the end of the year. This graph on the left shows the number of job vacancies. So as you can see, it is the highest it's ever been since the 2000s. It's huge. And where does manufacturing fit on that? Well, it's the fourth largest sector in terms of recruiting. And the people side, skill shortage, it's always been a significant risk and challenge to the sector. But at the moment, it's exasperated because everybody out there is currently trying to recruit. So what do we see in the actual economy in terms of business investment? Well, we're expecting 2022 to have quite a lot of investment. Part of that is due to this rising inflation. Part of it is due to not being able to recruit the right people. So businesses are investing more within their business, looking at more capital expenditure to fill that void. But we do expect that to drop off in 2023 once everything starts to plateau a little bit more. That said, who knows what 2022 is really going to hold, because we didn't see COVID coming on board, and then we've got Russia and Ukraine. What's going to happen with that situation in terms of the economy? So it's unprecedented times, as it has been, but I think what these slides show is that there's still confidence in the market, there's still growth, and people need to take advantage of that. I think one of the key areas for business is going to be actually increasing your prices. If you haven't done that already, certainly say that is something that needs to be done. There's not often that you get a chance where price rises will be accepted. In terms of what I'm seeing from my clients, I'd say typically about an 8% increase on their prices. Now, for some manufacturers in the automotive sector, that's going up to 16%, some up to 20%, just because of the shortage of chips and things. So depending on what kind of subsector you're supplying into, 8% might not be fitting, it might have to be more. But certainly, I think that is something to certainly have a look at. And I'll just hand over to Tim and see if you had any comments on the slides, Tim.
No, as you say, the numbers don't lie. But I guess just one thing to remind ourselves, though, is that UK manufacturing is extraordinarily strong and powerful in some of its underlying features. It's still a good 10% of our economy, and if you take a slightly more accurate view of what manufacturing actually is, compared to just that narrow definition that is sometimes used, it's getting towards 18-19% of the economy. It's still employing 3 million people. It's still contributing 50% of our exports, and it's still 2/3 of all that business R&D spend is coming from firms like yourselves in manufacturing. So we've got this thing that is naturally strong, and yet facing these extraordinary challenges of the moment. But I guess just if I may, a question back to you, Guy. A lot of those things about the pressures, how many can you kind of bundle them into things that you think are kind of structural? They're not going to change. We've got to learn to deal with them, versus the ones that are sort of temporary, like the chip shortage one in automotive. Is hopefully a blip that will go away, but some of those other things you mentioned, clearly not. Can you talk a little bit more about that, maybe? Yeah,
so I think the skill shortage, as I mentioned, that's not going to go away, and I think that digital adoption, which we'll talk about a little bit more shortly, is going to be key to that, and the retention of people. Obviously drifting slightly into a more of a HR angle there, but it's how do we retain our people, you know, in the market. I've got a steel manufacturer who's supplying the construction industry. Next to them is a huge Amazon warehouse. A huge Amazon warehouse has a big banner on the front going, we'll pay £15 an hour. So my manufacturer is going, oh, I've got welders who are on less than that. So I'm having to bump those up to try and compete, because, you know, it's almost like those skills, you know, that doesn't matter. Amazon will pay them £15 an hour for picking boxes. So I think that's certainly one it's not going to go away anytime soon, because for as long as I've been in the sector, it's always been a key issue, as we all know. I think the other area that's of interest is going to be the supply chain, which probably feeds through quite nicely. So, I mean, Tim, do you want to pick that up on the supply chain?
Yeah, so we had a chat beforehand about this to try and just kind of pick out the areas that from the evidence that Guy's presented and from what we're all experiencing, what are the key issues? And then the first one seems to be, hang on, Matt, I'm doing your job for you here. Can I carry on?
Hey, we segued it quite nicely, Tim.
Yeah, it's always like this.
I was here for time control. That's fine. So just for everybody else's benefit. So the slides are to set the scene, but the real value we felt was in the conversation between Guy and Tim, and with me kind of shaping the conversation on one of the key bits that everybody's feeling is the supply chain, Tim. So please carry on. And if, like I say, if you drift off into rugby talk, I'll bring you back online, but carry on.
I'll try and keep an eye on that, but yes, welcome some, and also anybody's got any questions, we'll have time towards the end for the latter half for questions from anybody. We'd really like to hear what your particular concerns are, and if you want to be putting them in the chat, that, you know, in case you can kind of preload your questions up, which would be really helpful. Yeah, on the supply chain bit, I guess back to that comment from Guy there, how many of these things are a blip caused by a pretty big blip caused by COVID, and how many are structural? They're going to be there forever, and we've got to learn to deal with them. And I don't know, the work we've been doing with UK government on, it went in two phases, which was first it was mid-COVID, mid-crisis, you know, can we get PP in the country? How do we end up? And sort of an immediate urgent conversation, which was sort of war footing type conversation about supply chains. And then it's drifted into but if we had things organized differently, would we not have faced this problem? And then it sort of lurches into a reshoring conversation very quickly, going, well, surely the way of solving all these problems is to bring everything back in a sort of a massive pendulum swing. And then we've ended up in a much better place, which is there probably is, and there clearly are, some benefits to having a higher percentage of certain sectors' supply chains locally, regionally, and nationally. That does not mean reshore everything, because then you have huge cost implications that just blow your competitiveness out the window. I think that's what we're trying to get our heads around with the firms we work with, is which sectors for which product at which time does it make sense to start to think about reshoring, and for which do you go not necessary. But the bit that's kind of confusing is what sits over the top, going with the big R word of resilience, because it doesn't affect your costs, but it does give you kind of an option for the future for a bit more security. So how much you're willing to invest in kind of being slightly less competitive to give you that resilience for the future. I can see a few people nodding on this one, because if I got that right, that seems to be one of the critical issues, that it's a cost to have that resilience, and yet not to have it means when something goes wrong, everything goes snap. If I'm allowed to do this, Katie, are you nodding vehemently at this point? Any comments on that?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, full agreement. So I'm the MD of Camden Voss, so we're a manufacturer based up in Mildenhall in sunny Suffolk, not very sunny Suffolk. And again, the majority of what we do is around plastic enclosures for the electronics industry. So a lot of that was sent overseas to China, moulded overseas in China. We're about to spend we've paid the deposit. We're about to spend another £1 million on investing in our own injection mould kit in our facility here, precisely for that reason, Tim. So, you know, will it save us any money? Not really. Are we finding with our customers that they are equally just as interested in sacrificing a little bit of margin for, you know, surety of quality and that resilience? Absolutely. So, you know, long may that last. But yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So I guess, Guy, then, from your perspective with your clients, do you see that as a common thread, that there's a willingness to kind of pay that resilience premium in order to avoid these catastrophic meltdowns, and the fact the experience of COVID has kind of brought something that was sort of a bit theoretical very much to reality?
Yeah, so I'd say with my clients, it's been mixed. So I'd say some of the larger ones have certainly looked at that, Tim, in terms of going, okay, I need to mitigate my risk. If me as an individual, I was to invest my pension pot, I'm not going to put my whole pension pot just in stocks. I want to diversify my portfolio and where my risk is going to be. And that's the same thing in terms of going, okay, so what suppliers are able to provide this? And then which ones can I have within the UK, China, the US? Because when it's spread, you're mitigating your risk. So knowing which suppliers. Now, the amount of volume you're doing with them obviously has an impact on how high up on the pecking order you get prioritized, which I think is one of the issues with it. But certainly that they have looked at it. I think for my smaller clients, they haven't so much. What I tend to find with some of the smaller clients is that their focus is very much on the day-to-day. Whereas this, I think, is a bit more of a strategic outlook of going, okay, who's able to provide the raw materials that I require? What prices, and having those conversations and going out to market and testing that from a procurement perspective. I think that's slightly more strategic, and for them, they're in the day-to-day. So they might think about it, but then they'll be on the shop floor having to get their hands dirty, you know. And I think it's really crucial for businesses at the moment, because of so much uncertainty and opportunity that brings, is to actually look at the strategic direction of business, where you want to go, because there's various different things, not just in terms of supply chain, but then in terms of new markets that can be opened up through various different things. So for your ESG strategy, if you're in a very commoditized product, your ESG is going to be your differentiator. And certainly that is something that some of the other businesses are looking at. But again, I'd say my SMEs are probably not thinking that way at the minute.
So it's that challenge of dealing with the very real, the very here, the very now, creating zero time to then go, but actually to avoid this happening next time, we need a slightly different strategy. And that's really difficult to find time to do. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think all of my clients have exceptional demand at the minute, really high levels, order books packed out, having to push back some of the customers in terms of their expectations. Yes, raw materials coming in has been slower, but I think with that, there's also an opportunity in terms of credit terms. So I found that some of my customers, when they're procuring goods, they've gone from being on 60-day terms to pay that off, suppliers now requiring 30 days maximum. But then on the flip side, with their customers, they're passing that on. So some of them are going, well, demanding payment up front, but then guaranteeing delivery within a certain time, or leveraging that. So we're seeing really high demand, full order books, an opportunity to actually increase your creditor days. Well, reduce your debtor days with your customers, and the suppliers have that negotiation, because if you can keep them still at 60 days, but put pressure on your customers, that's going to aid your cash flow situation. But I think, you know, it's an interesting time, and there's also the opportunity, I think, at the moment for things like product development, innovation, the R&D, as you mentioned, Tim. I mean, the R&D's tax scheme is it's a great scheme for SMEs. You know, we do a lot of that for businesses, and manufacturing is one of the highest claiming sectors. So to continue developing products and things, whilst there's a cost to it, there's also the incentive that comes back, which is quite handsome. So if you spend £100 on R&D, you essentially get 130 off your taxable profits, which you can turn into cash if you're a loss-making business. So if you've got £100 there, you'd get £19 back if you're a loss-making business, or £25 off your actual tax bill. So it's a real incentive.
And it's just a thought from me. It's one thing we didn't actually touch on when we were talking through ahead of this session. One thing we didn't come up, I was looking through the list here, and finance and access to finance isn't on here at all in terms of our conversation. But clearly, as guys just mentioned, that challenge on working capital in particular, as well as investment capital, can be a real barrier. I just wondered what your thoughts are on what that looks like at the moment out there.
Yeah, I think so. We're seeing a lot of deals happening. So a lot of companies buying, selling. There's a lot of work in our corporate finance team on valuations, and some really big ones going on in the market. So it does seem pretty flush with cash at the minute. Tim, didn't know if you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, well, just to echo that, a chunk of our work is about helping manufacturing organizations reconfiguring their manufacturing footprint, and we see demand for that increases after a period of acquisitions and mergers, understandably. And so, yeah, very much so. And so that's one bit. The other bit, it would be around the earlier stage firms who are seeking to grow very fast at the beginning, particularly on the tech side, a lot of activity there at the moment. So yes, I think there is the money around, but it's for those specific things. I think kind of linking it back to the supply chain issues, I think that's right. So I can absolutely see it on the R&D side, and R&D tax credits, as you say, brilliant idea, and really good scheme. I'd like to come back to that in a second, if I may, Guy. And then there's this broader issue, though, of ensuring you've got enough cash in the business to actually deal with these immediate issues of supply chain crises, and then building up resilience, and then building for the future. It just gets a bit of an equation that's not quite balanced. But on that issue of R&D tax credits, given it's such a good scheme, what do you think the barriers are? Why is it not more commonly used? Or do you think there is the right level of demand for it?
That's an excellent question. I think, so we're always talking to our clients about R&D. So in our world, it's like everyone knows about R&D, but then there's still so many businesses that you go to, and new businesses where it's not been mentioned. And it's certainly something that needs to be picked up more. And it's the education piece as much as anything, because I think whenever you hear R&D, you think scientific development in terms of mixing chemicals, lab coats, and all of that, and it's got the wrong image. It's more about technical uncertainties. So if you're developing something that's not widely used, you've got expertise in that area. You're developing a new product that's not been done before, or something like that. It all qualifies. And I'd always just say that it's such a handsome scheme to get money back into your business. Is talk to your accountant, talk to us, whoever. That it's a fantastic scheme, and it's relatively easy to apply for as well. So, and a lot of businesses will operate on a no-win, no-fee basis for it as well. Now I say no-win, no-fee, HMRC automatically accept it, but then might raise an inquiry. So it's not quite like that. But that's how people in the industry tend to badge it up. But yeah, it's certainly something to look at, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with people after this about R&D if it's of interest. But yeah, and I think the other thing, just in terms of financing and funding, is obviously interest rates are so low. The access to debt it's easy, it's cheap. Now, in terms of the economists' forecast for 2022, they are anticipating, well, some of them are anticipating that to rise up to about 1% by midsummer to try and control that inflationary increase that we've been seeing in the market. I don't actually think that it will go up to 1% at that time. I think that because the growth is slowing compared to what they were forecasting, is that there won't be any big jumps up in interest, that they will increase it slowly. So I'm a firm believer it will go up. I probably think by the end of the year we'll be at perhaps 1% or 0.75, but I think we'll go up in 0.25 tranches. But there won't be anything in terms of significant, because that just creates uncertainty. And what everyone needs at the minute is some certainty. So I think, yeah, that access to debt, certainly at the minute, is so cheap, and aiding these deals within the market, and also capital expenditure as well for your own businesses. I think capital expenditure at the minute is really important. So the corporation tax regime is only going one way, so that's going to be 25% at 2023. But we've got the annual investment allowance. So if you invest in a piece of machinery, let's say that costs £100,000, the annual investment allowance, that takes that straight off your taxable profit. So it's a great way in terms of capital expenditure, developing the business, especially when people are so hard to get at the minute. At least with a machine, you don't get the HR issues either, which I know for all of us is always a nice thing. So I think there is that opportunity there. And again, I think it feeds into that strategic thinking piece, which is really important for business at the moment.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, go on, Tim.
No, I was going to say, is that a rather neat segue into the two issues you flagged up there?
Yeah, I was just going to go exactly the same place. My only comment was that deals market, I guess, just is one of those barometers of how strong the UK manufacturing is at the moment and how positive people are at it in terms of what it's delivering, kind of echoing some of your comments earlier, Tim, in terms of where that is. But I think that is a really good segue, isn't it, into the questions that have been raised about resilience and cost and competitiveness, but also looking at digital adoption. So I guess, Tim, with your innovation background and what you're seeing from a big picture globally and in the UK market, how's digital adoption going? What's that looking like at the moment, and how are you seeing it in your world? So
it's a slightly, well, one level of very simple picture but the devil being in the detail. So I suppose the fundamental bit is what we find with all the companies we work with is a slight frustration at the answer is digital. Now, what was the question? And this sort of push that, of course it's digital. Come on, everybody should have this. Industrial digitalization, made smart, all of these great things. They're a tool for a purpose. So what's the problem you're trying to fix? And is digital the right solution for that? And this is where we find some kind of slightly frustrating conversations with some of the big kind of national programs and some of the big tech vendors. The way the conversation goes, just sort of, it's a given, it's a good thing. Why aren't you listening? Which is, I think, not right. And others may have similar views on this or different views. So we get can see I guess, two bits to frame the starting of this. One is, I'm going to go back a level before that. So what are the problems that need fixing that could be helped by digital? And that's maybe where we want to focus the conversation. But just to kind of flag up what might be coming in a minute, there's also digital stuff we've got now that we know how to use, we've had for quite a while now. It's about diffusion of existing technologies. And then there's the adoption of new things that are arriving that are much more uncertain that could have a bigger effect. So we're trying to sort of frame it as what's the real problem that needs fixing, and is this actually the right way to do it? And then are we talking about an off-the-shelf thing that is very well understood and it's just about adoption and education, or is it about this sort of different thing over here, which is more uncertain and emergent? And all the way through this, which maybe is the segue to the bit we'll talk about afterwards, which is the skills bit. So there's a very powerful graph it's a few years old now, of why are manufacturing firms not adopting digital technologies? It's one of those surveys with 100 questions, and it's sort of a little histogram of all these things. And then two spikes way up high. Number one spike is data security and cybersecurity. Just going, I don't want to do this. I don't believe we're confident in our security. And the second one was skills. We're not comfortable with this. We don't feel we understand enough about it to make a rational decision, a good decision about whether it's the right thing to do. So at the highest level, great government programs rolling out. We're slightly behind our biggest competitors, certainly a long way behind some of our largest competitors as a nation, but some good things happening. What we're noticing, though, is there's a very uneven adoption of it. The big prime firms like in defense and aerospace and chemicals, they've got the resources to adopt it. They are adopting it. It's all going pretty well. Right at the other end of the very small manufacturing firms, we see a very, very different and mixed picture. It's not negative necessarily, it's just much more mixed. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to work out, well, given the vast majority of manufacturing firms in the UK are SMEs, why, instead of just going, oh, that's very difficult, but wonder why that isn't happening, we're trying to develop solutions specifically for that community of firms. And without launching into a sales pitch, I'll just mention one word, and if anybody wants to look it up, you're absolutely free to. It's the label we've given it is shoestring. So the idea, how can you do digital manufacturing on a shoestring? What's the lowest cost way you can possibly do this? Linked to very specific business needs. So not just going, here's a cheap way of getting a robot, or here's a cheap way of getting a vision system. That's secondary. It's what is the business problem you're trying to fix? And then what's the cheapest way of getting that? And then most importantly, how do you actually implement that? But I could speak for hours. I'll stop there and just, I don't know if that frames the Guy for you, that those issues of kind of high level, the diffusion of what we've already got versus what's coming along, and then the massive difference between the big firms who can afford it and the smaller firms who might struggle more.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly echo that. You know, we see that in the market all the time, this disparity between the two. I guess my question to you, Tim, would be, in 2022, do you think that gap will close, or do you think it will continue to be a large void between what the two are doing?
Oh, I'm going to be really irritating now, and people may wish to mute me at this point. It's a system problem. It's not that we're going to fix that digital thing and then it'll all be good. And the danger is, if adoption of digitalization is regarded as a key performance indicator, that could skew things quite badly. So yeah, we've had loads of consultants out there flogging digital systems, all great, look, and all these companies now say they are more aware of it. Well, that hasn't actually fixed. So has productivity gone up or not? What's the thing you're trying to fix, not the superficial bit of activity you've done? So I think that was a Weasley answer, wasn't it? A better answer would be, yes, I think it will. And I think some of the rollout of the national programs that are now going regional will be very helpful. The slight concern we have from an East of England perspective is that there is enormous effort being put into increasing digitalization in the Northwest. They're running it as a massive pilot, which is great, but a pilot is there to test whether it works, with the assumption it'll then be rolled out more widely. And we're just really keen to see that we kind of accelerate that process a bit, so it doesn't become let's leave it up there, see what happens, and do great things for a region of the UK that needs the support, but not wait 3 to 5 years and see what happens and then roll it out. It's got to be happening in parallel, and that's really difficult. How do you run an experiment very quickly, make sure you've done the right thing, and then be ready to roll it out more widely? But I know, as those on the call will know, there are regional schemes as well on this. But maybe just on the blind optimism that I tend to bring to most things, this issue of will it get better this year? Yes, particularly around if my colleagues do their job right and focus on this idea of the shoestring approaches, starting with let's go engage with as many companies as we can, let's build the relationships with the companies we've already got to say, what are the issues you're facing? We can now help you with some digital solutions. And I think the more we close that gap between the business problem and the technology being available and it not being that high tech, it not being that complex, the better we'll be. The problem is still back to the next thing I think we're going to hit on, which is the skills issue. Are there people in the firms able to adopt these technologies? And I think we are reducing that gap by making the technologies more accessible. It doesn't remove the gap, though. Someone's still got to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tim. Just a bit of a question for you, Guy. One of the challenges there in skills is actually just availability of labour, isn't it? And we've seen a lot of that in the sector since of the last couple of years, post-Brexit, whatever you want to assign it to. Are you seeing that as a driver for those SMEs to look at automation and digitisation? And is that becoming the driver for that decision within the business?
It's a good question. So I think we have seen some businesses invest in more digital adoption, but then the flip side, we've seen some that don't want to. And I think part of that is that those that are making the decisions aren't necessarily always aware of what is out there. They don't understand it. They see it as a huge cost and not necessarily the benefit that can bring with it. So what they've been used to is that if we need to increase the number of units being produced, we need to bring in more people. And that is the go-to. That is, you know, the automatic answer. It's not necessarily going, right, I need to invest in digitalization to improve it. I think what we also see in terms of manufacturing, that I'd say logistics do this well, is that they actually monitor productivity a little bit better, output of the assets in terms of not just machines, but output in terms of people and that utilization of the resource that you've got. So I think, you know, that's some of the conversations that I've been having with my manufacturers is looking at that utilization piece of machines and labor, and being able to then advise. And, you know, I think a lot of consultants do that as well, and Tim, in terms of looking at, you know, even the layouts of factories and things to make sure you are maximizing your productivity. Now, when we look at the UK from a macro perspective, our productivity has fallen way down compared to other countries. And that is largely due to the CapEx investment in this country. You know, the likes of Germany will be investing more in terms of machines and learning. And I think that's perhaps a bit of a culture thing, an education thing on our part. So I think that's why it's important for, you know, alliances like Smart Manufacturing is that it brings everyone together to actually have these conversations, go, look, these changes aren't as big and scary as what they might seem. They're actually, some of them are relatively easy to introduce. And I think that's one of the main things that we're seeing, is that first step of change isn't that difficult. There's lots of easy things that can be done. And, you know, one of the things that we can talk about is about energy and sustainability. You know, there are quick, simple, easy things that can be done on that to improve your ESG credentials that don't break the bank, easy to do. It's just changing the mindset, I think, and that feeds completely into this whole digitalization piece.
And just on that skills piece, Bob's kindly posted about the Smart Manufacturing Alliance's Acme 4.0 program, which has got support around getting the right technologies and the right solutions in a business. And I've heard numerous anecdotal stories of companies buying a robot because it's the right thing to do, or the fancy thing to do, or they had a bit of spare money and it's sat in a corner gathering dust because they didn't quite know how to integrate it. And that leads into the skills piece, doesn't it? Because it's not just the skill of using and operating, it's that skill of understanding where it sits within the business and the process and driving that productivity piece. Is that some, you're nodding there, Tim, is that something that resonates with you in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the best way of framing this? So one example, well, two actually, of just, we've got for our students at the moment, we're so pleased to have students back in the building, so nice. Guest speakers today coming in from manufacturing to talk about advanced manufacturing processes, and I was talking to the guy from one of the local firms, and he made this point. He said, look, we've got a high-tech product we're producing, but we're producing it in a relatively low-tech way. It's very analog, you know, it's very, the thing, yes, all our clients are getting something very high-tech, we're producing it in a low-tech way, relatively low-tech way. How do I find, was his question, the people who've got the engineering skills that know this sector and all these digital skills? And if I do find them, why are they going to come and work for me? And it's not, it's a similar conversation on a slightly different scale to one we had with one of the big aerospace companies. Well, it was Rolls-Royce. They were open to talk about this, and we were talking about their digitalization processes. You know, they've got problems too. And they said, yeah, we need people, not just engineers coming in to do the core business of making turbines, and that's difficult enough. We've got a pipeline problem with engineering, and particularly in manufacturing, across the spectrum. But then we also need people who get the digital side of this as well. And finding people with both those skill sets, very unlikely. I mean, but very difficult. If you go for specialists who really get the digital bit, they go, there's no way we can afford them. And, you know, this is Rolls-Royce talking, and they're saying, look, honestly, the people, some of the skills we need, anybody who's got these will be snapped up by one of the big tech firms or someone down in Shoreditch. What am I going to have to do to persuade them to move to Derby? And if I do pay them enough, it's going to massively skew pay levels across the business and actually cause all sorts of other problems. So how to deal with that? So that all sounds a bit negative. One of the positives, though, is trying to find creative ways of solving the problem. And my colleague Duncan McFarlane and others working on this low-cost approach to digitalization have hit that head on by going, yeah, it's great. You know, you can come along and talk to us. You understand our manufacturing business. You listen to our problems. You propose a solution and you can show us what's there. So who's going to do it? Who's going to actually do that? Even though we've made it as accessible as possible. And the interesting point, they said, well, frankly, some of those who've been in the business for a while are going to struggle to change. And I see it in the chat here, a comment about culture, to kind of naturally resist it because it feels like a bit of a threat, particularly if it's taking skills away and automating them. So one of the approaches is working with the regional colleges, the further education colleges, to say, let's get these low-cost digitalization approaches into the apprenticeship programs so that can feed into to businesses of all sizes. And that is something we're finding quite good uptake on. So we're doing it in Northern Ireland and Scotland and a bit in the east of England as well. We'd like to do more, but it's not a quick fix. And it's back to these things again, that there is no immediate fix other than having good people from the Alliance and from elsewhere going into firms and helping. It's really difficult to recruit, and yet all the solutions that are proposed are difficult, but can be done, but they're going to take a little while to filter through. I think that's particularly challenging for the smaller firms and those who've been around for a while, who have deeply embedded cultures around this is how we do things here. And we're trying to do a completely new thing, which seems to be, frankly, a bit flaky. I'm not sure I want to do this. I don't know, Guy, does that resonate with your clients and what you hear?
Yeah, I think there's been a couple of great comments in the chat function, actually. And one of them I wanted to pick up was about, call it cluster. I guess it's this collaboration, really, between manufacturers. And it's been spoken about quite a lot, really, over the last few years. But I think we still haven't seen this collaboration aspect actually come to fruition, even though everybody's talking about it. I think a lot of businesses want to do it. You can feel very isolated in your own business. And I think it's great what the Smart Manufacturing Alliance are doing, because it brings everyone together, can share their problems. And, you know, if someone has a specialist, then, you know, sharing that resource, particularly when they command a high salary. And there's the opportunity then to share that resource and potentially the cost as well, forming an agreement. You know, and I think that's probably the way we're going to have to work, and it feeds all into that supply chain once again in terms of reshoring. So all of this is very interlinked, but it'd be fantastic to see the collaboration point, I think, come actually to fruition, as I say, because it has been spoken about a lot. I think it's just business has taken the step in the right direction. In terms of the skills side of it, again, a lot of businesses don't necessarily invest. They are trying to just buy the people with the skills already. And, you know, I think it's really hard as a business, because if you invest in that individual in terms of training them to become that skilled labor that you require, they jump ship, you know, and you make all that investment. So I think holding on to people has become really important, and what you can do as a business around those softer things in terms of ensuring that they're engaged in what they're doing. And I also see that's where the digital adoption can also play a big part in that, in terms of giving those individuals that aspect of the business to go away, look into, and actually be part of that organization. Because that is the biggest thing that we see with the generation coming through, is that they want to see the whole picture. They want to see how they fit into the organization, their contribution, and how that all fits together. They don't just want to see the turret of the castle. They want to see the whole castle kind of thought process. So I think that is probably one of the key things. I guess this is about 2022, what we expect to see. These things are very cultural things that have to change, and I do believe over time they will. Will there be a change in 2022? I don't think there really will be. I think there's so much uncertainty at the minute. Everyone has, to some extent, battened down the hatches, investing in, probably looking inwards a lot at the minute because of all this uncertainty, making sure that, you know, you've got all your ducks in a row. But I think as certainty comes back, and it will, because we can see from the growth forecast that the demand is going to continue to be there throughout 2022. Once things settle some more, I do think that these kind of things can form part of it and should form part of a strategic conversation within the business. I do feel that strategy isn't necessarily always given the time that it needs, and there are available frameworks out there that really aid that process and facilitate it. I think share some of those things, and I think Matt, you have a point on that as well.
Yeah, it was a culture piece, really. I think I've had a few conversations these recently, and Katie's just alluded to it in the chat box as well. That investment in the culture of an organisation and that ability to invest in staff. And you're right, people are reluctant to invest in their skills, in their workforce, because they want to, they're worried about them getting upskilled, then moving on and doing something else. And there's so much support out there at the moment for skills that are out there in the market, free courses and support for everything up to level 5 and 6 courses, which is fantastic. It's a great opportunity to really show staff that you value them and you see them as part of your business. And one thing through the alliance we're trying to do, and we're really keen to do, is to showcase for those people coming into the sector that yes, it's going and working for any business that's out there, but actually you're working in a cluster, in a sector that is really dynamic and growing, and the career opportunities that you have in front of you aren't limited to one organisation. They're much broader than that. Tim, is that, you're just nodding away there?
Yeah, I'm just agreeing with everything. So we had a meeting with the high value manufacturing Catapult about their strategy and how they're the things they do and things they admit they're not doing so well and want to do more of. But it was exactly to your point, Matt. They said, look, to your point as well, Guy, about this being a system problem. We've got it's all the bits need to fit together. But fundamentally, it's a sector problem as well, getting people to come into the sector and stay there. And so it's a bit of an old chestnut, but just this idea of, showing what, and it sounds very sort of 1950s, showing what modern manufacturing is, but it really is. It has changed dramatically. It is a fantastic career. It pays well. It gives huge job satisfaction. All of these things that we all know, that message is still not getting out in the right way. And we come back sometimes to, again, the IET just did their annual survey of skills. And, yes, they're talking about engineering generally, but it absolutely resonates, I think, with everything we've said about manufacturing. But it's back to that point about people just going, but I didn't know that's what it was. And so we have the whole problem, even if you are interested, and the data show that if you know somebody who works in manufacturing, you're more likely to go into it. But for an awful lot of people, they don't know anybody in manufacturing. And this is remains a big problem. And that's what we as an institute are trying to help with, but it's quite an uphill battle. And then there's the issue of, we can bring it right back down. I don't like the analogy of the pipeline of people, because it sort of implies once you're in the pipe, you stay there, whereas the truth is we should be much more fluid and mobile. That analogy breaks down quickly. But it's about things like careers advice in schools. At what point do we make it clear that this is a thing? And it's hugely, has huge variety and job satisfaction, well, all the things we've talked about. Am I right that we still haven't nailed that one? If we haven't nailed that one, we're kind of stacking up problems for the longer term. I don't know, Claire, I can see you nodding. Is this something that resonates with your experience?
We have quite a large STEM festival here in Peterborough, and unfortunately because of COVID it's not been running, and just the lack of awareness. We're trying to link up with more schools to bring them into our innovation lab, show them what's available to them as they work through their choices for GCSEs and the different pathways, and also how exciting the industry is. And like you say, I think there's that opportunity to educate young people in, what culture is, what innovation is, and how a company can operate to kind of, when they go into the work environment, they can boost these SMEs that are struggling with the whole concept of R&D, because they're aware of it and they know how it can work and help a business. So yeah, I do completely agree. It needs to start at school.
And I think for an organisation like us, it's really important that we try and make sure that collaboration happens and engage and bring the businesses into that conversation. So you've got more SMEs and some of the smaller businesses getting involved in those initiatives, so that they're going and showing what's there. It's not just the big multinationals that are there with a footprint that have got the marketing budget to put their job adverts out there. But there's this whole diverse range of businesses that are making wonderful things that go into all sorts of pieces, from aerospace into Formula One and all that, right on your doorstep. And until you uncover it and start engaging with it, it's really difficult for a student or anybody to be inspired by what's going on. So the work that Claire does and other people across the county are really important. And yeah, the more people can get involved in them, I think will help change some of those perceptions in school and retain those people. Because you're right, Tim, those degree qualified engineers can get paid a lot of money in London for doing not engineering stuff.
Yeah, and I don't know how, well, I guess this maybe is the segue into the other thing that should be, arguably always is, the biggest pull into manufacturing, and that's the conversation around sustainability. And again, you know, the more listening to those who are much younger than I am, back in the day, you know, I had to have it explained to us why sustainability was even a thing and why it might be important. We don't need to teach that anymore. You know, it is absolute, you know, all the students coming through, you know, they are the ones beating us up for not doing enough. And so we see that transition there. So the role of manufacturing in driving improvements to sustainability, solving the problem, I think is another massive attractor into the sector, and particularly in this region with all the capabilities around sustainability related businesses and environmental technologies. Arguably, we're in a great position to support that. So there's the whole environmental sustainability sector and the role manufacturing plays in that. And then there is the way that sustainability goals and sustainability targets can lead to a more productive and competitive business, because a lot of the time you're just removing waste and redundancy anyway. So Guy, does that reflect what you're seeing as well, both from a sector perspective and also from a driver perspective?
Again, mixed on sustainability, because some businesses it's not on their radar, others it is. And I think, you know, the two feed in nicely, but I think that anything to change within business, it's got to be commercially viable. You know, it's got to have a financial benefit to doing it. So sustainability, a lot of the time people see it as just a cost and don't necessarily see it as being able to actually increase profitability. And I think it's the same, you know, in terms of taking on some of the lower ends of the pay scales in terms of staffing, school leavers and things, is that's a cost. They require training. I'd rather have an off-the-shelf piece to fit in rather than that long-term mentality. So in terms of sustainability, energy, obviously prices are going through the roof in terms of energy. So sustainability, you know, that is a potential solution to that in terms of what can be done. There's also opportunities with it, because as I mentioned earlier, if you are in a commoditized sector and product, the ESG side of it is your differentiator. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is a lot of the big businesses talking to their suppliers, typically SMEs, going, okay, what are you doing around ESG? What are you doing around sustainability? Because that all feeds into that big company's reporting on environmental things. So that is a good way to explore new markets and, as I say, be a key differentiator. And it doesn't always need to be, you know, we talk about sustainability and renewables and things, and everyone thinks solar panels, I need a wind turbine. But actually there's a lot of simple things that can be done just in terms of cutting wastage. I mean, even just changing your energy supply to a renewable energy supply, that's feeding into your credentials in terms of, you know, feeding into net zero. And COP26 has really shone a light on sustainability. So yeah, I think in terms of changing supplies to renewable energy, I think in terms of just putting in light efficient lights, you know, cutting wastage of you know, defects, and as well as the outlay within the factory, you know, all those things all feeds into that ESG piece, and they're quite simple, low cost things to do.
And you've seen that uptick since COP, have you, Guy, in terms of clients and their attitude towards it, their energy towards it?
Yeah, far more conversations. It does tend to differ, the conversation. Again, I mean, one of the other great things about it has been electric vehicles. So again, lots of tax breaks. It's where you're providing company cars. There's hardly any benefit in kind. So it's all those things as well. But again, a lot of this falls into the education piece, because even with electric vehicles, people don't understand how it works. You know, do I need to use a 3 kilowatt charger, or do I need to use a 20 kilowatt charger? And what's the difference, and what's the cost? And it's not like going to a petrol station, just filling up your car. So I think with all of this, there is an education piece. And, you know, I think for ourselves and Tim, that we have a responsibility to, you know, talk to our clients and you know, feed into that discussion. And that's one of the great things about my job, is that I get to sit on the boards for well, tens of manufacturers, sort of 50 plus manufacturers, you know, and have these kind of conversations with them and see where their strategy is, which is really interesting. But yeah, it does tend to be a mixed bag. Some people still just see it as a cost and a lot of hot air, but actually it is important, and it is important to the younger generation coming through.
And maybe just, I've got a very angry colleague in that office over there, and he's angry because he's in the field of industrial sustainability, and he used to work for Martin Baker ejector seats, and he just, oh yeah, an angry man with purpose, I should say. And one of the things he really, you know, he's like you guys, he's driven by the numbers. He goes, look, these are the facts. And if we want to make a difference, there are huge things we should be doing about reducing, you know, use of concrete. If we want to make a massive difference, use less concrete, you know, the amount of food's consumed there. But he goes, that's a massive system problem. What can I, Steve, do with the skills I've got from manufacturing? And it's like the comments that are coming into the chat there. And I think, you know, Gavin's nailed it. It's about efficiency improvements. It's about this ability to just say, I'm running a more efficient business. There is less. So yes, absolutely. The reduce cost of electricity, get your EV, get all the benefits of that, do all those good things, but also focus on making the business more productive and efficient, and hence more productive. That will be less damaging on the environment. And then one of the ways to become more efficient is through the adoption of digital technologies. And so you can see it becomes this cascade. These are all linked, exactly as you were saying, Guy. These are all linked things. And that's where the role of an alliance like this really plays a key part, because it's not just going, how did one company do that one thing to adopt that one technology? It's how has that transformed the business to become more productive? What's all the messy details of how that worked? And just one other thought. We've got some colleagues looking at adoption of digital technologies and how it can be very successful. But one of our worries is a lot of the companies who are involved want to talk about their success stories. And we go, that's great, thank you very much. Could you also talk about the stories where things didn't work? And there's a bit more reluctance there. So there's this kind of, this is where an alliance like this is really good, because if you've got the trust, people will be happy to talk about things that didn't work and, you know, get help to help make it better. Some of the mainstream stuff that's pushed out is just, you know, excitement, glory, fantastic, look how brilliant we were, rather than look at the pain we had to go through to get to this point. And actually we changed direction 3 times and then we ended up at this point. I'd like to share that story with you. So I think, again, to this point about education, it's being open about these things being very joined up, and that it's difficult and it doesn't always work. And let's not try and repeat the same mistakes over again. Sorry, I'll shut up now. I'm getting carried away.
No, I just wanted to build on. Yeah, sorry, Matt. I just wanted to build on one other as well in terms of sustainability. You know, we started off talking about the supply chain, you know, and reshoring. You know, again, it's a simple thing to do, mitigates your risk, but then that also feeds into that sustainability story, because you haven't got the carbon footprint of bringing it in from China, you know, and all the things that go with that as well. So it's all those simple things that you probably look at anyway as a business, but that does feed into your sustainability and how you look to the outside world. And it's just making sure, you know, I think sometimes being in that frame of mind to make sure you capture it and, you know, and sell that to the wider market.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it, how everything we've talked about actually is all interlinked. So whether it's supply chain, sustainability, the skills, the digital adoption, they're all relying on each other, and this is what happens in the real world in a business, isn't it? These all things are interconnected, and it's not just one thing in isolation. So it's important just to reflect and remember on that as businesses, of how you're tackling each of these issues and how they all flow together. So yeah, I think that's a really good place just to just to pause for a second, and I'm really keen on Guy and Tim just to give us a bit of a reflection. We've talked about lots of challenges there in terms of the sector and what 2022 looks like, whether it's increase of prices, raw materials, supply chain challenges, energy costs, all those things we've talked about. But actually, we've talked about lots of optimistic pieces as well. So if we could just ask you for both for a couple of minutes kind of summary on what we've talked about and what you see, what you're looking forward to, and what the optimistic pieces are from you in 2022 and beyond. So I'll start with you, Tim.
Sure. I guess the bit that particularly excites me is the fact that the manufacturing community is so open to wanting to make things better, you know, exemplified by the Alliance here. But every company we work with, there's a sense of, you know, we want to do this thing, help us do this thing. We know we can do it, it's all going to be positive, but we're going to need some help. And that's why I think that message of collaboration and the role of an alliance like this, but any collaboration that goes on, is really, really important. And I think to the point about culture, having that cultural mindset of I want to collaborate, I want to make things better, you know, that's a massive barrier that's been overcome straight away. So that's, to me, is a hugely positive message that came out very clearly from this conversation. I think this issue of the heads down dealing with operational, can we survive this year? Can we make it through the year? Versus what's our strategic plans for 3, 5, 10 years? It's been massively amplified by what we've just been through. Sorry, the gap between those two things, but exactly as Guy was saying, we've got to bring those back together. It's got to be both those things happening, which is easy to say, hard to do. I think there was something really interesting about that. There are things out there that we know will help. As you were saying, Guy, you know, R&D tax credits, they're there. They exist. They're not overly complicated to get. They can deliver massive benefit, but not everyone has had the experience of getting those. So can we do more to kind of push things like that, getting it away from that's for high-tech lab coat, you know, test tubes. It's not. It's for anybody who's developing a new thing. It's really, really good. And last 2 points, I guess, would be everything we've talked about here points to something very positive around skills. A willingness to say, look, if we're going to do this, if we're going to hit sustainability targets, if we're going to become more productive, we're going to need digital, and that's going to rely on people. This is not we're going to go out and buy more stuff off the shelves. This is a message about investment in people for the longer term. And that then links to this really positive message that manufacturing is great and we do need to do more. And perhaps the biggest number of comments that have come up, if I just add up all the comments that relate to outreach, schools and careers, reflects the fact that there's very high level of, you know, enthusiasm for filling the pipeline. Now, we're not going to do pipeline, ensuring the longer term security of the workforce. That's better. That's absolutely it. And then, no, I think that's it. Those would be my main points. So I leave with a very upbeat message, but notwithstanding that the immediate crisis has definitely not gone away, but it does present opportunities for changing the way we think about these things.
Cheers, Tim. Guy?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, education, all that side of it has obviously been the most popular theme here. And I think one of the main things is that we all have a responsibility to talk about manufacturing within schools. I think it was disappointing in the government's industrial strategy that was released a couple of years ago that the commitment towards manufacturing was a lot less than what I thought it should be, you know, and the focus is on STEM. I actually think there's a responsibility on us, SMEs, of what excites me, not actually being a manufacturer, is going out and seeing the floor and everything in operation and all of that. And I think, you know, getting students to do these visits is going to be what encourages them to do it, because it's really cool taking just bits and pieces and putting it all together to make something that we all use in everyday life, and that process and how that happens. So I think we all have a responsibility, and it's not just for government, but I do think government should be doing more. And, you know, part of sitting on the CBI East of England board is those conversations with them to say, look, that's what the CBI should be pushing with government, is more investment. And, you know, for me, largely looking after manufacturing clients, that's what I tend to push. That's always my key agenda item for them. I think in terms of practicalities for the current year, what I'd say is probably review your pricing, review your terms with suppliers and customers. to make it as beneficial as possible from a cash flow perspective. As I said, it's not often you get an opportunity where you can push these things, and now is that time, so take advantage of it. In strategy, I think about where you're heading, CapEx, the people, what markets you want to enter into, product development, that side of things. And yeah, always happy to kind of help or facilitate any conversations you might want to have internally, because when you haven't got, I guess, strategic people in the business, I think whenever I've tried to have those conversations with manufacturers, they will always descend back into operational issues, and it's important to keep it at a very strategic level. So always happy to help have those conversations as well. So they would be my kind of key takeaways, I think.
Brilliant. Cheers, Guy. That's been a truly fascinating chat, gents, and we've covered a lot of ground in the last hour or so. So we've got both of these two for the next 20 minutes. So an opportunity for any questions from the floor, if people want to ask anything specific, either about what we've heard or anything that we've not covered that you'd want to just get their views on and their opinions on. Now's the perfect time to do it.
And whilst everyone's thinking of their questions, I'd just like to thank everyone on how interactive they've been in this session. It's been fantastic and far better than just talking to just a load of black screens and blank and no one saying anything. So thank you for that. It's been really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, while people are pondering, just this issue of outreach. So one of the things we've really struggled with is, so when we do a lot of stuff to try and bring particularly primary age people in, and exactly your point, Guy, there's so much about STEM, and that's difficult enough. You then refining it down to manufacturing, and it can be a bit of a hard sell, but we do our best. And we notice that it's a lot of the messaging we're giving is actually going to the parents and the teachers. That's where huge resonance, almost the biggest gaps are, the biggest challenges, because they haven't had that experience. We said, well, wow, why is that? We got back to the idea of, visits, going to see things, actually seeing stuff being done. And it was difficult enough before COVID, and then of course, complete shutdown, which has, stuffed all our industrial projects for all our students, but we've got back now. Any thoughts from anybody on how we can start to do that again? How can we help local schools make that, not just that we're going to talk about this thing, but we're going to show you this thing. And this is one I can't quite solve. So I'd really welcome help from anybody on that. How do we open up to allow teachers and pupils to actually see this? So it's much more tangible, it's much more visceral, because you've seen it and go, oh, remember that thing we saw? Not, here's this person who came to give a nice talk and some PowerPoint slides about manufacturing. It's no, we've actually seen it. I don't know. Any thoughts or comments on that? I'd really love to hear them.
I mean,
you're just unmuted. Go on.
Yeah, if I'm able to pitch in, we've been trying to look at this, and actually kids learn by doing, and actually any kind of involvement with an activity where they can see how things are put together. Looking at how perhaps a 3D printer can then develop these little parts, they put them together, and it shows you like a basic injection molding machine, those kinds of things. So we've been working really hard with a couple of the local schools to try and bring them in. But then when it gets to board level and the decision needs to be made, we find that COVID is still getting in the way. So that's really been the main obstacle to us engaging with schools. And I'm hoping that with these, though I don't know if the rule changes are coming a bit too soon, with these rule changes coming in, if that will then, allow that flood of secondary school children in, so they can actually see a working lab and all the different equipment and get excited with these hands-on activities, as well as engaging the parents and encouraging them to come in and have a go themselves.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. Thank you, Claire. Yeah.
Guy's colleagues, Francis here, one of Guy's colleagues, showing how up with the technology I am with the microphone there. But just chipping in with a 15-year-old doing GCSEs, a 13-year-old son and 12-year-old daughter, very much up with the kids, so to speak, although not, as I play dad. And the point there was, as well as channeling through schools, but to go through these other medias that I believe the children learn so much good information from. So what are we talking about? Even your TikTok and your YouTube, these are the media that if we can have some form of program that perhaps in a fun, obviously in a fun way, educates, it's looking at that as well, because the amount of information the children pick up in that way, they know more than me. That was my point.
Thanks, Francis. One thing that through the Alliance we're really looking to create is in the summer is creating a challenge in effect that's open for people in education to involve. So that idea is coming through the chat around making something or developing a concept and trying to think of how we use those technologies to unlock that opportunity and really engage them in that process. So really opens for people's suggestions, appetite, energy to get involved in that and really drive that together. It'd be great to have a handful of businesses coming with live real world problems and challenges that we can put out there to a community to start inspiring those kids in that problem solving world, which is ultimately what engineering, a lot of it's about, is solving problems. So getting those processes working, and then in a short-term piece where the skills piece is absolutely looking at how virtually we can get people around these factories. Sapana, you've got a question or comment?
I've been just listening with fascination to the points around skills and early talent. And one of I think somebody asked for suggestions, and I was just, it just occurred to me, how about, is there any way of perhaps organizing mini internships for school-leaving children, or even when they're in their final year, just so that they can get a real understanding of the workplace and all of the practical excitement that goes on a day-to-day, and that might just sort of pique their interest. We are working on apprenticeships in manufacturing engineering at the University of Peterborough, ARU Peterborough, and this is one of the things that has come up quite often in our sort of thoughts and conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, I've come back on that, but Bob, you might have something as well, so pass your next, Bob.
No, thanks for that. Bob Hart, I'm the Programme Director for the Smart Manufacturing Alliance. Just going back to the, how do we raise the profile within schools of manufacturing? How do we get schools, pupils, teachers to understand what manufacturing engineering is all about? And this is a story that Matt is probably getting really tired of now. But the thing that got me into manufacturing in the first place was a factory visit when I was 8 years old. I went to the factory where my uncle worked and I saw a forge for the first time. Big steam hammer banging down on a white hot piece of metal, sparks flying everywhere. I was sold. What we need to do, we need to try and get the kids into the factories to see what's really going on there. We've already said that we don't understand, or they don't understand, what manufacturing is. The only way you're going to do that is to get them to see it, feel it. Thank you.
Yeah, just on Sapana's point, so we've a lot of businesses don't know that those opportunities are out there for people to offer work placements and opportunities for people to come into that job. And I've put 2 businesses in touch with ARU and University Centre Peterborough in the last couple of weeks, just to unlock those opportunities. And they've got live opportunities in their business where students can go and be a part of it. So Katie, just you've got your hand up. I'll come to you next, Richard.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we're finding it a real challenge. So we've got kind of tacit enthusiasm from the school here in Mildenhall to have more support from local businesses, but when push comes to shove, it's their teaching staff who are also doing the career support, and they're incredibly busy, and it's very, very hard when they've got the offer of kind of more academic based kind of career support versus engagement with a business. I think what we're finding is, I'm the product of 2 teachers, so I kind of know, I've used them as my sounding boards, but I don't think, teachers by their background won't have necessarily had experience of manufacturing or engineering either. So we're kind of having to broaden it a bit, like what Tim was saying, and find out where the kind of blocker is. So we're trying really hard to push for kind of almost like a bit of time on teacher inset days to come and visit manufacturing sites so that they can see it and understand what roles there are, because I think they don't, again, from some of our interactions, they don't appreciate that, we're an SME, but we've got HR, we've got finance, we've got design engineering. You could do a whole range of stuff within that, and it's fine. So yeah, we're trying to kind of widen the blocker. And again, in terms of that parent engagement, there's still such a massive stigma around the word apprenticeship. So it's like, how do we kind of just avoid the use of the kind of trigger. But actually, can we invite parents in after work to come and see what that actually means, and meet some of our apprentices who are really enthusiastic and really bright and great examples of it, to just try and reduce the stigma. But it's a massive, it's a massive problem to solve. So we've got a kind of local manufacturing group, and that's our kind of key discussion point tomorrow's session, to talk about kind of early years engagement, because it's kind of incumbent on all manufacturers to step up and do it, and almost like become inescapable.
And that's a piece, Katie, that me and you talked about in terms of getting those case studies online, getting that live experience from people that have been on that journey, either that are now in senior post or early on that apprenticeship journey. And yeah, not every parent can get into every business. So if we can build a platform and a community where that information's in one place, it becomes really easy. So yeah, absolutely. Richard, I promise to come to you next.
Yeah, thanks. This summer, I'm a small engineering business, so smart engineering in Huntingdon, so like a micro business. This summer, I took on 4 Nuffield research placement students for STEM education. And it was great. I had them doing machine learning at the edge in a drone, and on calls like this. So we're each flying our drones in our gardens, doing AI and machine learning at the edge. And I asked whether I could do it again this year. And I said, well, I can't really do it if it's not remote, but I've been talking to Alia and the innovation lab there, which I'm a member of as well. I said, look, if we can work together and I can bring some students into Alia, we can actually do something. But in answering that question from STEM Learning, I said, how many Nuffield research placement students come from Peterborough? And you know what the answer was? 0. So there's got a huge program, but there's absolutely 0 take up of this in Peterborough. And I really think with all manufacturing companies on the call, we should maybe try and do something about this and change it, because the kids are there, the enthusiasm's there, but we're just not getting the message through to the schools that these sort of schemes are even available. So it's like apprenticeships, but this is like the modern version. These Nuffield research placement students, I had 2 doing we're doing computing at the university they were going to go to, and 2 doing engineering, and they were fabulous. They were really, really sharp kids. I thoroughly enjoyed it. My business learned a tremendous amount from doing it with them. But why not Peterborough? Why not local companies? And I really don't know why we haven't got our act together in this area. Don't know. just me.
And possibly one of the reasons that the alliance has been established by the combined authority to an opportunity at Peterborough to help develop that and make that happen. And I think what's really great is the amount of appetite and energy you get from manufacturers when you talk about this topic. You're all so passionate about the industry you work within and inspiring that next generation, because it's such an important bedrock of the future of manufacturing in the UK. So I think these are brilliant conversations, and definitely plenty of work for us to do in terms of connecting all this together and helping build that collaboration, that platform that adds value. Is there anything from Guy or Tim, anything you want to add on what we just talked about?
Other than really to reflect on the enthusiasm that's there to do something, and then very pleased to hear that the Alliance is there to help that thing get done, because that I'm just slightly worried that COVID making everything more difficult, and this idea of the physical factory visit, actually getting people together to go and see something. Not dissimilar to Bob, I had a slightly different experience. I was taken, I went to school in Methwold in Norfolk, and was taken on a school visit to Lotus. I remember that at that point going, oh, why? So there, racetrack, factory, car, oh, I get this, this is, I want to do this. And it was just one afternoon, and it was one minibus full, one teacher just going, I think we should do this. It wasn't a huge effort, but the effect it can have is huge, as it clearly was for you as well, Bob. So how do we do simple things like that? And it just, when we try to do it occasionally now, we're confronted with so much red tape, so much, yeah, not now, and oh yes, but they're all gonna have to stand outside and look through the window. It's just, it just becomes more difficult. So anything we can do to just remove some of those barriers would be great. And I think that's where, Matt, what you're doing can be hugely helpful, particularly with the level of enthusiasm witnessed on this call from all the firms present. I think there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, the positivity is fantastic from everybody here on the topic. It's just making sure that happens as best it can. And Francis spoke earlier about, the use of YouTube and TikTok and those virtual tours, even as a starters for 10, to kind of get people engaged, because, they do look at the websites and things, and they want to see what companies are about, what's available to them. So supplying resources like that, I think is a good step in the right direction.
And maybe there's one of the positives to take away from the negative, because we've not been able to do any factory visits. Well, we've now started again, but we weren't able to. So all our in-company projects had to stop. So everything was done remotely. And the visits, it's huge enthusiasm from companies to do them virtually and just have a walk around with a camera. We've now got all those resources. We're going, well, this is great. We've got all that now. And we had nothing before. It was nothing or go visit. Now we've actually got a whole lot of assets we can use. And I think this is something, a positive to take away from this. We've learned stuff, we've got more stuff, we should use that stuff more effectively.
And universities become very expensive these days, so automatically that is a real sell. We take on school leavers as an organisation, and where they don't want to take on all of that debt, if anything. And we've held events with parents and students after hours, so they can get back from work and and try and encourage that side of it. And it's the same for manufacturers, and I think it's great to hear some of that commitment and those kind of things already being thought about and happening. So long may it continue.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, conscious of time, everyone, and thank you again for all your input and connection, but especially thanks to Guy and Tim. Absolutely wonderful conversation. Brilliant chat across the whole spectrum of the outlook for 2022 and what's happening both economically and just operationally within businesses. I think it's been really insightful. Please share reviews, comments on LinkedIn, Twitter. Follow us on Twitter if you aren't doing. SmartMFGA, I think, is the Twitter handle. But search Smart Manufacturing Alliance and it'll come up. So please share and follow that content. We'll be posting this online. We'll be also taking snippets and posting them as social media content over the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Just a couple of things to mention. So we've got an event on Thursday with PECT and ZAR PLC talking about sustainability in manufacturing. So ZAR are going to talk about some of their pains and successes in integrating some sustainability planning in their business, and PECT are going to talk about some of their programs, some of their grant support programs that are there for businesses looking at becoming a little bit greener in how they operate. And just generally looking at sustainability in manufacturing and how they're seeing that in their world. And then in early February, we've got another session looking particularly at food and drink manufacturing, but looking at advanced Industry 4 technologies and how they can be integrated into it. Both of those details are on our website and be shared over through LinkedIn over the next couple of days. So have a look and book on and join those if you can over the next couple of days. But thank you again for being a part of the session, and I hope you've really enjoyed it and look forward to speaking to you all soon. Thank you very much.